What's up, kings and queens? It's Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm back for another comprehensive preview for player picks over this upcoming 11-game slate. It's MLK Day, so we got some early ones. I've been in the lab researching for over 2 hours, so get your notebook out because we're going to go through a lot of players in this one. As always, I'll be sharing my screen, taking you through each player who has a great matchup based on the defense's last 15 games. I use props.cash to sort through all of this data, and I've got a special discount code for all of my viewers. So sign up today, get 25% off your first month by using the code DAFT25 when you sign up. Now let's go. We're looking at the Houston Rockets versus the Philadelphia 76ers. Joel Embiid is back, and I'm sure he's going to have another big game, but he doesn't have the best matchup on the books right now that two players do. The very first one is Jabari Smith Jr., and we look at his rebounds line. So this is looking at 9.5, but I have seen this available for 8.5, but that line is moving. So the 76ers, they allow the fifth most rebounds to power forwards in their last 15 games. He's covered this 9.5 rebound line in 4 of his last 10 games, averaging 8.6. He's covered it both times against the Philadelphia 76ers that he's played them, recording 11 and 12 rebounds. Embiid is back. It's going to be difficult for Şengün to get some boards tonight, I'll tell you that. But Jabari Smith, predicted to have a very big game on the rebound front. The next player is for Jalen Green, and we're looking at his rebounds and his assist props here. So let me jump this over to RAs. So firstly, the 76ers allow the third most rebounds and the third most assists to shooting guards. Jalen Green has covered this in 3 consecutive games against the Philadelphia 76ers. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered it in 7 of his last 10, averaging 8.5 rebounds and assists. So it's definitely something that I'm going to be getting on. So jump on that before that line moves. Heading into the Pelicans versus the Mavericks. The first player here is Brandon Ingram. We're looking at over 30.5 points, rebounds, and assists. The Dallas Mavericks allow the most points, the most rebounds, and the 4th most assists to shooting guards. Over his last 10, he's only covered this 3 times, averaging 27.1 points, rebounds, and assists. He's gone under in 6 straight games. But looking at his head-to-head matchups, he has hit in 2 of his last 4, including his very last game against the Dallas Mavericks. His recent form is awful, but the matchup is great, and he's done it before against Dallas. The next player is Zion Williamson, and we're looking at his rebounds in this one, over 6.5. He's hit it in 1 of 2 against Dallas. He had 7 rebounds in his last matchup against them this year. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered this in only 3 of his last 10, going under in 6 consecutive games. The matchup is great. The recent form isn't, very much like Brandon Ingram. His minutes are inconsistent. The Pels have been playing good. They have blown a few teams out, but even in some closer matchups, he hasn't got it done. But he does have a great matchup today. The Dallas Mavericks are very small in their front court, so Zion's a good chance. Speaking of rebounds, against that very small Dallas Mavericks front court, Jonas Valanciunas screams out to me here. The Mavericks allow the 4th most rebounds to centers over their last 15 games. Jonas has covered this in 5 of his last 10, averaging 9.4 rebounds per game. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 4 of his last 7, averaging 8.4. And he did have 12 rebounds in his last matchup against the Dallas Mavericks. Jumping into the Orlando Magic versus New York Knicks. Now, there are limited markets at the moment, given Jalen Brunson and Wendell Carter Jr. are game-time decisions. The one player that's available that does have a great matchup is Paolo Banchero, and we're looking at his points line, over 26.5. Now, the Knicks allow the 6th most points to power forwards. He has covered in only 1 of his last 4 matchups against the Knicks. In positive news, he did cover this line against the Knicks this season, scoring 29 points. Over his last 10 games, he's covered this in 6 of them, averaging 27.6 points per game. Franz Wagner, I believe, is still out in this one, so Paolo's going to have a lot of opportunity. The Knicks not defending power forwards very well at this moment. Very interested to see how this one plays out, because I actually see Banchero and Julius Randle as very similar type players. So we'll see how they go in this head-to-head matchup. Jumping into the Pistons versus the Washington Wizards. Now, there are a lot of players who have a great matchup in this game. The reason being, both of these teams suck. So some may not hit, but I've got to share it all. So the very first one, we'll start with all the players from Detroit, and then we'll jump into the ones from Washington. We're looking at Jaden Ivey, over 4.5 rebounds. The Washington Wizards allow the 4th most rebounds to shooting guards. Now we can see he's covered this in 5 of his last 10 games, averaging 4.8 rebounds per game. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 2 of 3, including his only game against them this year, where he pulled down 7 rebounds. Both teams are rubbish. There may not be a blowout in this one, so it could be quite competitive. But Jaden Ivey, that's a very strong lean from me, strongly considering his rebound prop because we know he's going to get the minutes. The next player to think through is Beef Stew Isaiah Stewart. You'd be looking at his points and rebounds. So his prop's not available yet, and that's because Bogey is a game time decision. But the Wizards, they do allow the 4th most points and the 4th most rebounds to power forwards. So one to really look out for there, depending on how this team matches up. Jalen Duren, we're looking at his rebound prop. It is over 12.5, which is quite high. The Washington Wizards allow the 2nd most rebounds to centers over the last 15 games. Duren, over his last 10, he's covered this 4 times, but he has gone under in 6 consecutive games. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered only 1 of 3 games, but that one that he did cover was this year where he pulled down 14 rebounds. It's got a great matchup. The opportunity is going to be there. I think the line's about right, but it comes down to how much stock are you going to put into their recent form. Speaking of centers, we're heading over to Daniel Gafford from the Washington Wizards, and we're looking at his points prop. And that's because the Pistons allow the 2nd most points to centers over their last 15 games. He has not covered this line in 4 games against the Pistons, including their matchup earlier this season. But over his last 10, he has covered this 4 times. He's averaging 9.2 points per game. The next one, we're looking at Denny Advia from the Washington Wizards, and we're looking at his points, rebounds, and assists. The reason being, the Pistons, they allow the 4th most points, the 4th most rebounds, and the 5th most assists to small forwards. Now, Denny Advia can do it all. He can score, can rebound, and he can get the assists. Looking at his last 10 games, he's only covered in 4 of those games, but he did pump this line out of the water. He is averaging 26.2 in that span. So it should be a no-sweat bet. He's either not going to get close or he's going to absolutely destroy it. In 4 head-to-head matchups against the Pistons, he's gone under in every single one, but he is a much better player now than he was when he played them. So he has started to grow throughout the season. It's an interesting one. I don't have the confidence to play it, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he covers this. The next player with a great matchup is Jordan Poole, and we're looking at his points prop for this one, over 19.5 points. The Pistons allow the 2nd most points to shooting guards over the last 15. Poole's covered this in 2 of his last 3. He did not cover in his only game in a Washington Wizards uniform. He has crushed them in the past when he played for the Warriors. But yeah, he's very up and down. And if you can see it if you look at his last 10. He's covered in, what's that, 4 of his last 10 games. He has covered it in 3 straight. But prior to that, he didn't get close to it. So does Jordan Poole continue the form that he's shown? I know when it comes to shooting guards, the Pacers and the Hawks, they give a lot of points to shooting guards as well. Maybe Jordan Poole is just waiting for the right matchup to explode. But yeah, it's a lean for me at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him cover it. Also looking to the Washington backcourt, we're looking at Tyus Jones. Not looking at his points, we're looking at his assists. Over 6.5 assists. The Pistons, they do allow the 6th most assists to point guards. Tyus Jones is covered in 4 of his last 10, averaging 5.9 assists per game. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 1 of 3 games. He went under in their first game of the year against the Pistons, recording only 4. Moving into the San Antonio Spurs versus the Atlanta Hawks. So we just spoke about Tyus Jones. We're now talking about Trey Jones. Do not get them confused, because Trey Jones has a great matchup when it comes to his rebounds and assists. So you'd be looking at over 9.5. The Atlanta Hawks, they do allow the 3rd most rebounds and assists to point guards over their last 15 games. Trey Jones has covered in 1 of his last 3 against the Hawks. Looking at his last 10, he's covered this 6 times, averaging 9.7 rebounds and assists. So the matchup is there. He's clearly capable of covering this line. Definitely one that I'm considering at the moment. Another one in the San Antonio Spurs backcourt is Devin Vassell, and we're looking at his assist prop. It's only, I think it's 3.5 when I checked. Yep, it's 3.5 assists for Devin Vassell. The Hawks allow the 6th most assists to shooting guards over the last 15. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, averaging 3.7 assists per game. And in head-to-head matchups, he has covered in 1 of 2. He's gone 3 and 4. 4 in his last matchup against the Hawks this season. A play that I do really like, and I'm considering a ladder for this one. He's not a very popular player, especially because he's more famous for one-handed free throws, or he's famous for not passing the ball to Wemby, and that's Jeremy Sohan. And we're looking at over an 11.5 points. So the Hawks, they allow the third most points to power forwards. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10, averaging 11.7 points per game. But what's crazy is what he's done in head-to-head matchups. Check this out. In his last 2 head-to-head matchups, he scored 18 and 33 points. The 33 points was about a month ago at the start of December. He absolutely annihilated the Hawks, who can't seem to beat or defend anybody. So I think there's some value in the Spurs players in this one. The Hawks are overvalued because they do have a better team. They just dog shit. So definitely someone that I'm considering laddering, but I'll make a decision after the video. Heading over to the Atlanta Hawks, though, we're looking at Trae Young and his points prop. So it's over 29.5 points. The Spurs allow the third most points to point guards over the last 15. Trae's only covered in 1 of his last 3 against them, but scorched the Spurs with 45 points in a matchup a month ago. Looking at his last 10, he has been pretty cold. He's only covered it 3 times, averaging 24.5 points. So he's got the great matchup. Is that enough to get him back into the land of 30 points? I do not know. Sticking with the Atlanta Hawks backcourt, DeJounte Murray, he's got a great matchup when it comes to his rebounds. The San Antonio Spurs allow the 6th most rebounds against the shooting guards. DeJounte Murray did play for the Spurs as well, and these players tend to go back against their old team. They tend to put on some great performances. Looking at his last 10, he's covered this 7 times, averaging 4.9 rebounds per game. He did cover 4 rebounds in 9 of those games. And in head-to-head matchups against the Spurs, he's gone 7, 6, and then 3 in their first matchup earlier this year. We're going to the small forward position now, and we're looking at Saddiq Bey. We're looking at 7.5 rebounds. His rebound line has risen over time. The Spurs do allow the 2nd most rebounds to small forwards. Now, he has not rebounded well against the Spurs in the past, but obviously his role changes from time to time depending on lineups. But looking at his last 10, you can see that he's covered this 4 times, averaging 7.2 rebounds per game. Definitely capable of getting 10-plus boards, also capable of 4. So depends how much stock you're going to put into this matchup against the Spurs, and can you see him hitting it? The next one is for Jalen Johnson. Now, he's taken money away from so many bettors over the past week. Looking at his PRA for this one, though, because he does have another great matchup. The Spurs allow the 7th most points, 3rd most rebounds, and the 3rd most assists to power forwards. Jalen Johnson has had the easiest 3-game stretch in history when it comes to matchups because he's versing the Spurs, who can't defend power forwards. He just versed the Washington Wizards, who can't defend power forwards. They give up the most points to power forwards. And then he just came off prior to that versing the Indiana Pacers, who couldn't defend power forwards either. And he's gone under against the Pacers, under against the Wizards, has another great matchup against the Spurs, and he'll probably go under again. So it's someone that I'm not going to be taking, but he's clearly capable of going over. But when the Hawks are shit, Jalen Johnson is especially disappointing. So I think you got to wait for the Hawks to start winning before you start backing Jalen Johnson. Jumping into the Golden State Warriors versus the Grizzlies. Limited markets at the moment. Half of the players from the Grizzlies are either injured or game time decisions. But Steph Curry, he's got a great matchup today looking at his assists. The Grizzlies do allow the 5th most assists to point guards. So his line's 5.5 on some bookies, but I have found it at 4.5. So if it's at 4.5 at the appropriate odds, definitely something that I'll be taking. You can see he's hit this in 6 of his last 10 games in head-to-head matchups. Hasn't gotten close. Well, he has gotten close, but he hasn't hit this. But at the same time, that Grizzlies team he's played in the past is nothing like he was going to be facing in this one. Another one of the most unpopular players in the NBA is Draymond Green. We're actually looking at his points prop of 8.5. The Grizzlies allow the 5th most points to power forwards. He's covered this in his last 2 games against Memphis. And over his last 10 games that he played in, he's covered this 5 times, averaging 8.9 points per game. I really think it's a good opportunity that he covers this, and that's just because of how the Warriors are playing at the moment. They're not getting all their points from 1 or 2 players. Everybody seems to be chipping in. Kuminga, Wiggins, Curry, Clay, Saric off the bench. Even Looney's covering his points line recently, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Draymond cover this one. Just a quick one on the Chicago Bulls versus the Cleveland Cavs. Markets are available for all of their players, but none of the players in this game have an easy matchup based on the data from the last 15 games. So we jump straight into the Heat versus the Nets, and believe it or not, the Heat lines are not available. That's because Jimmy Butler, Kevin Love, they're both game time decisions at the moment. And for the Brooklyn Nets players who are available, none of them have an easy matchup in this game. So we're jumping straight into the next one. We're looking at the Boston Celtics versus the Toronto Raptors. And all the players with great matchups in this one happen to be wearing Boston Celtic uniforms. So the first one's Drew Holiday, and we're going to talk through his assist prop at the moment. It's 4.5. The Raptors allow the second most assists to point guards. He's covered this in 4 of his last 10, only averaging 4.1 assists per game. In head-to-head matchups, though, he's covered this in 4 of his last 5, averaging 5.8 assists per game. These last 2 games are the ones where he happened to be playing for. Oh, no, the last 3 games are the ones that he played for Boston. So 7, 5, and 3. Derek White, he also has a great matchup. But again, that's about his assists because the Raptors allow assists to everybody. They allow the 7th most assists to shooting guards. Derek White's covered this in only, what are we looking at? 2 of his last 7 against the Raptors. These 3 games were this year. So he's gone 5, 5, and 7, but over his last 10 games, he's only covered this in 4 of them, averaging 4.5 assists per game. So probably a little bit too high for me at 4.5. Definitely something I'd consider, but I wouldn't take that at 5.5. This one is for Jason Tatum, and we're also looking at his assist prop. The Raptors allow the 6th most assists to power forwards. He's covered in 6 of his last 10, averaging 5, but in his last 4 head-to-head matchups against the Raptors, he hasn't covered this at all. He's averaging 3.3 assists per game. The last pick in this game is for Kristaps Porzingis, and he does have a great matchup when it comes to assists, but he has a great matchup all over the place. So we're just looking at his PRA in this one. So Kristaps, the Raptors allow the 4th most points, 5th most rebounds, and the 6th most assists to centers. As you can see, he's covered his PRA line in every single game against the Raptors. Well, his last 5 games against the Raptors. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered his PRA in 5 of them, averaging 29.4 points, rebounds, and assists. You got to dive deeper to figure out what's happening in a lot of these matchups. But look, Kristaps Porzingis is definitely a play that I'm going to be taking, but I'll talk more about that in my best bet section. Jumping into the Pacers versus the Utah Jazz, we're looking at Lauri Markkanen over 33.5 points and rebounds. This line has moved. It was 32.5 points probably about 45 minutes ago. And the Pacers, we do know they allow the 2nd most points to power forwards. They also allow the 6th most rebounds. Now, Lauri's covered this in 6 of his last 10, averaging 32 points and rebounds in that span. In head-to-head matchups, he's averaging 36.7 points and rebounds. He's covered in 2 of 3 against the Indiana Pacers, finishing on 33 when they match up earlier this season. Another player that I do like, well, there's 2, but we're looking at his points prop for this one, and it's Jordan Clarkson, and it's also Colin Sexton. So I'll go through them both. The Pacers allow the 3rd most points to shooting guards. Now, both of these guys have terrific form. Jordan Clarkson, he's covered in 6 of his last 10, averaging 8.5 points per game. He's killed it against the Pacers. 3 matchups, averaging 27 points per game. Colin Sexton, on the other hand, check this out. Looking at his last 10 games, Colin Sexton, he's covered in 7 of his last 10, averaging 20.4 points per game. So if you broke down their last 5, they've both pretty much been hitting their lines. In head-to-head matchups, he's averaging 15.3 points per game. But one thing to call out, his minutes are quite inconsistent. So Colin Sexton is the starting shooting guard, and Jordan Clarkson is coming off the bench. I will be taking a bet on one of them, so just wait for my best bets, and I'll go into a bit more detail. The last game, though, we're looking at Oklahoma City Thunder versus the LA Lakers. Not many markets available. SGA is a game-time decision. The Lakers always have AD and LeBron as game-time decisions too. But from the markets that are available, none of those players have an easy matchup in this game. Although I can see SGA, if he does play, having a big one. And AD probably on the boards up against Chet. So before we jump into my best bets, I want to give a shout out to BTN Jerome, who got himself a bag from our last video. He said, I appreciate all the info yesterday. I turned $400 into $5,700 using your data and tweaking it. Now, I love this comment. Not only do I like seeing people make some money off the research and picks that I put out, but there are also hundreds of content creators on YouTube sharing picks with reasons why. And the majority of these content creators, like myself, are not professional bettors. So you shouldn't just see what they're taking and play it yourself. I encourage you to use your own knowledge, do your own research to make your plays. You can use the data that I share to help support you. But if anyone has had similar success stories as BT and Jerome, where you've taken the data from these videos, found some success, I'd love to hear it. So drop us a comment on what your strategy is and whether it's winning so others can take the same into consideration. Now let's jump straight into my best bets. The very first one, I'm looking at Jordan Clarkson over 18.5 points. We did just speak about him, but he's covered this line in 16 of 31 games this season, averaging 17.9 points per game. His recent form will get you mildly erect. He's covering in 4 of his last 5, averaging 21.6 points per game. What's crazy about this is that he's doing his damage off the bench. Colin Sexton, he's been the starting shooting guard, and he's been playing well, scoring at a consistent rate. Now, even though these guys play the same position, both statistically have a great matchup, I'm choosing Clarkson over Sexton as he gets more minutes and more shot attempts. Sexton playing 23 minutes per game to start starting, attempting 13 shots, whilst Clarkson's playing 31.4 minutes per game, attempting 16 shots per game. Sexton does shoot a higher percentage, and it's a real possibility that both of these guys cover their lines in this one. I did mention earlier the Pacers allowing the third shooting guards. In recent games over the past fortnight, we've seen DeJounte Murray play them twice. He scored 29 and 30. Dante DiVincenzo had a career-high 38 points against them, so they are quite weak defending twos. Clarkson has covered this line in 4 straight games against the Pacers. He torched them for 33 points earlier this season. Now, I know that the Pacers have slowed down the tempo without Halliburton. They're sitting in the middle in terms of pace since he's been out, but the Jazz also play at the 8th highest pace this season. The total points line is set at 247.5, so the game will present many scoring opportunities, and I'm hoping that Jordan Clarkson continues his scoring run. He's also got some Filipino blood in him, and so do I. So let's go, JC. Do it for the flag, my boy. Jumping into the next one, it's Steph Curry. We're looking at over 4.5 assists. Now, Steph's only covered this in 18 of 36 games this season, averaging 4.8 assists per game. His recent form creating for others has been great, covering in 7 of his last 8 games. CP3 is out, which could explain Steph's recent uplift in assists, but he's only missed the last 3 games. And Curry had already covered in 3 of his last 4 games with CP3 in the lineup. Now, Draymond Green makes his return from suspension, which is a risk to this play, given that Draymond creates shots for Steph. But I've dived into the numbers. Looking at the last 10 games that Steph's played with Draymond without CP3, he's covered this line in 7 of those games, averaging 7.3 assists per game. I mentioned earlier the matchup advantage with the Grizzlies, allowing the 5th most assists to point guards. They have a stack of injuries, but based on how this Warriors team is playing, I don't see them blowing these guys out. The Warriors, they do have some scoring opportunities out there, and if Steph continues to get the same amount of attention to limit his scoring impact, he's going to be able to find these guys for some easy buckets. Now, his form over the last 3 games isn't great. He's gone under in all 3 games, but this Memphis team isn't built the same with all their injuries. They're going to have some dogs out there. They're going to force him to pass. And hopefully this game stays competitive so Steph can bring out those assists. My last bet that I have, someone that we've spoken about already, but I'm taking Kristaps Porzingis. But I'm taking his over 19.5 points. So KP's covered this line in 14 of 29 games this season, averaging 19.2 points per game. This might be an unpopular pick because KP's numbers have been terrible recently. He's got under in 5 straight games and he's only averaging 12.6 points per game. But looking closer at these games, I'm willing to forgive his recent form. He got injured against the Pacers. He finished on 19 points against the Jazz and whoever the fuck this other team is. He played less than 30 minutes against the Bucks and the Rockets due to blowouts. He's got a great matchup against the Raptors, who allow the 4th most points to centers over the last 15 games. Since the trade, the Raptors have improved their offense and they have been a lot more competitive in games. Hopefully, the Celtics let off some steam by blowing out the Rockets and this game stays close to the predicted line of 7 points to keep the starters on the court. The Raptors, they're still missing Jakob Poeltl, so they're still very thin in their front court. Thaddeus Young will be starting at center, and at 6'9", he's going to be an easy matchup for Kristaps Porzingis. Now, KP has had a lot of success against the Raptors. He's covered this in 4 of his last 5, averaging 21.6 points per game. He went under in his only matchup against them this season, but he shot the ball poorly and he didn't make a three-pointer. So KP has a great matchup. He's played 3 games since his injury. I'd expect him to play close to 30 minutes and get back to his normal usage rate. The Raptors have length on the wings, so Tatum and Brown may not have the best matchup in this game. It's obvious that KP has the mismatch, so they've got to go to him. So let's go KP. Let's get those buckets, get them points, my boy. Now, that's all the picks. That's the preview. That's all done and wrapped up. Let's jump straight into a recap of the fucking treacherous day that I just had. So jumping into the recap, as you can see, I got murdered today. The picks I shared on you the last YouTube video were on Domantas Sabonis, over 21.5 points. We got hooked. My man finished on 21. He shot a crazy field goal percentage, but he managed to rack up 15 or something assists and went into overtime, and he still wasn't able to score a bucket. I don't even know if he attempted a shot, to be honest. So that was quite painful. Obviously, our value play didn't hit for him. He have 8 assists in like the second quarter or something. So that was all dead and gone. For the season on this YouTube channel, we're up 49.2 units. We're still over 10% ROI. I had a pretty average day on my normal picks as well. So this is how the day went. Pretty awful, to be honest. Got absolutely murdered. Jumped on Jaime Jaquez, scored 15 points by halftime. Never came out of halftime. Got injured. We got hooked on Sabonis. Looking at Giannis, I had his over 33.5 points. Lost 2 units on him. They double-teamed him quite a lot. He missed a fair few free throws. He didn't do much damage in overtime either. That was all Dame time. And I also took Anthony Edwards on 28.5 points. He finished on 33. I thought, they have so many wing defenders from Terrence Mann to Paul George, Kawhi if they have to, Westbrook off the bench, and Anthony Edwards still killed him. Shot a crazy high percentage and absolutely murdered my pick. So, look, pretty terrible day. January is still a loss for me overall, just in the negative. But we've shown in the past that we can get it done. We're at 109 units. Well, I'm at 109 units, but I am under that 10% mark. So looking back to getting back to winning days. But that's a wrap of my picks, my preview, my recap. Like the video if you did. If you made it this far, I thank you. Drop some comments. Let me know what your thoughts are. Wish me the best of luck. Tell me to keep going because that's what I want to keep hearing. And here's that favorite song of yours. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another preview.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to you live from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice and the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.